We're going to go ahead and get started, folks. I will now call to order the meeting of the Omaha Planning Board. The Planning Board members that are here today are Trenton Magid, David Rosacker, Jeffrey Moore, Michael Pate, Patrick Morse, Christine Carnes, Vice Chair, and I am Greg Rosenbaum, Chairman. Members of the city staff that are in attendance today are Dave Fanslau, Planning Director, Eric England, Planning Manager, Mike Carter, Planning Board Administrator, Alan Thielen from the City Law Department, Debbie Hightower, our Secretary, and Debbie is training Lisa Agans. Thank you. And Lisa, welcome. Our rules of procedure are as follows. Notice of this hearing has been published. This board met this morning, reviewed all of the cases, and visually inspected sites. Copies of today's agenda are located on the table in front of us. You are welcome to come down and pick one up. Anybody needs one, they're just right here. The cases on the consent agenda will be heard first. Consent cases are perceived by the planning board to be non-controversial, have already been heard, or been recommended for layover, and therefore will be read and voted on without the opportunity for your testimony. If you wish to testify, you may remove the cases from the consent agenda. When each consent case is read, I will ask if anyone wants the case removed. If you do, please stand up and say so, and the case will be removed. This case will then be heard in the order in which it appears on the regular agenda after we go through the consent cases. When the case is heard, you will have the opportunity to come to the podium, state your name and address, and give your testimony at that time. When hearing cases on the regular agenda, the board will first hear from the applicant, and after the applicant states their case, we will hear from the proponents, and then we will hear from the opponents. After both sides are heard, the public hearing will be closed and no additional testimony will be permitted unless a board member requests additional information. When at the podium, please state your name, address, and whom you are representing for the record. Your testimony is very important to us. In the interest of time and courtesy to others, please be short and to the point. We will try to limit each case to 10 minutes. Those directly involved in the case, please speak first. We request that large groups select a spokesperson to represent that group, therefore eliminating repetitive testimony. When giving testimony, please provide new information and try not to repeat what has previously been said. We do ask that all speakers and others be treated with courtesy and with respect. In that regard, please remain silent while seated, and please take time now to turn your cell phones off, if you would, please. Our decision to approve, deny, or continue a case made here today will be forwarded to the City Council for another public hearing and final disposition by the City Council. Conditional use permits are an exception to this rule. The board's decision made here today on conditional use permits are final and not forwarded to the City Council. Lastly, upon the advice of the Law Department, all communications to the board members from attorneys or other interested parties should be transmitted through the Planning Department so that they are made a part of the public record. The department will then transmit all that information to the board as well as to the rest of the public. Rezoning matters are an exception to this rule. We will get started with the consent cases. We have quite a number of them, so it's going to take a little bit. And again, if you want some consent case removed, you just need to stand up or hold up your hand and we will remove that case. Consent agenda items. Item number 2, case C10-17-184, C12-17-185. Applicant RL Development, LLC. They are on consent for layover. Request final plat approval of Plaza 133, a subdivision outside the city limits with rezoning from GI, GC, MH, and DR to GI and DR, and approval of an IG Industrial Gateway Overlay District. Portions of the property are located within the floodway Overlay District and Flood Fringe Overlay District. Location north of 101st Street and Blair High Road. Does anyone wish to have this removed from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none. Agenda item number 3, case C3-18-82, applicant Planning Department on behalf of the City of Omaha. This is on for layover. Request approval of the Kiewit Headquarters Campus Redevelopment Plan. This was laid over from our May 2nd meeting. Location, an area generally bound by Cummings Street on the north, 15th Street on the east, Cass Street on the south, and 17th Street on the west. Does anyone wish to have this removed from consent agenda? Seeing none, moving on to agenda item number 5. Case C10-18-59, C12-18-60. Applicant Earhart Griffin and Associates for Sage Capital. It is on for layover. Request preliminary plat approval of Preserve on Pacific Edition, a cluster subdivision inside the city limits with the waiver of section 53-99, which is sidewalks, along with rezoning from R1 to R5. This was laid over from our April 4th meeting. Location 9402 Pacific Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none. Moving on to agenda item number 12, case C10-14-44, C12-14-45, applicant David Steyer, Ken Hagan. This is on for layover. Request revised preliminary plat approval of Majestic Point, lots 244 through 252, and outlots I through N, a subdivision outside the city limits with rezoning from AG to DR and MU, location southwest of 168th and State Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed from consent? Seeing none. Agenda item number 13, C10-18-87, C12-18-88, applicant Heartland Church Network. It is on for approval. Request preliminary and final plat approval of Heartland Church subdivision, a minor plat inside the city limits with rezoning from DR and R6 to R5. Location 5046 Terrace Drive. Anyone wish to have this removed from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to agenda item number 14. Case C10-18-89, C12-18-90. Applicant Pacific Reserve LLC, Chris Erickson. It is on for approval. Request preliminary plat approval of Pacific Reserve, a subdivision outside the city limits with the waiver of section 53-8-4D lot frontage, along with rezoning from AG to DR and R5. Location 20601 Pacific Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on. Agenda item number 15. Case C12-18-91, applicant Sweetbriar 2 LLC. It is on for approval. Request preliminary and final plat approval of American Interstate Plaza Replat 2, a minor plat located inside the city limits, location southwest of 160th and Evans Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Jim, okay. And that was 15. Okay, that will be removed. Moving on, agenda item number 16, case C10-18-92, C12-18-93. Yuri Paskar is the applicant. It's on for approval. Request preliminary and final plat approval of Benny Row, a minor plat located inside the city limits with rezoning from R435 to R4. Location, northeast of 67th Avenue and Binney Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Okay, it will be removed. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 19, KC 10-18-100.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
We're okay?
Yes.
I'll start over again.
Sorry.
Agenda item number 19, KC 10-18-100, applicant Suzanne C. Rittenhouse. It's on for layover. Request rezoning from AG and DR to AG and DR. Property is located within the Flood Fringe Overlay District. Location southeast of 252nd and Blondo Streets. Does anyone wish to have this? Okay. That was 19. Moving on, agenda item number 20, KC 10-2-69, applicant Woodhouse Auto Family. It's on for approval. Request approval of a major amendment to the mixed-use district development agreement for Village Point to allow automotive sales. Location, 225 North 170th Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed from consent? Okay, seeing none. Agenda item number 21, KC 10-18-110, applicant Greg Poor. It's on for approval. Request rezoning from DS to CBD. Property is located within an ACI 1 overlay district. Location 1401 Jackson Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed? Okay. Seeing none. Agenda item number 22, KC 10-18-98. Applicant Esau Yadula, I hope I said that right. It's on for approval. Request approval of an ACI 3 PL Area of Civic Importance Overlay District. Location 11910 West Dodge Road and 11815 Webster Street. Does anyone wish to see this removed from the consent agenda? Okay. Moving on, agenda item number 23, KC 10-18-84. Applicant Mark Sanford and Valerie McGill. It's on for approval. Request approval of a MCC Major Commercial Corridor Overlay District. Location 3203 North 204th Street. Does anyone wish to see this removed? Okay, seeing none. Agenda item number 24, KC 10-18-99, applicant Blue Sage Apartment Associates, LLC. It is on for approval. Request approval of an MCC Major Commercial Corridor Overlay District. Location northwest of 204th Street and Blue Sage Parkway. Anyone wish to have this removed from the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none. Agenda item number 25, KC 8-18-101. Applicant, NY Auto Sales. On for layover. Request approval of a special use permit to allow automotive sales in a GC district. Property is located with an ACI 2 overlay district. Location northwest of 71st and Blondo Streets. Anyone wish to see this removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none. Agenda item number 26, KC 8-18-102, C7-18-103. Applicant, Americo Real Estate Company. It's on for approval. Request approval of a special use permit to allow automotive rentals in a CC district and approval of a conditional use permit to allow warehousing and distribution limited in a CC district. Location 5808 South 144th Street and 5801 South 147th Street. Anyone wish to see this removed from the consent agenda? Seeing none, agenda item number 27, case C8-18-104, applicant Pacific Reserve LLC, Chris Erickson. It is on for approval. Request approval of a special use permit to allow daycare service general in a R5 district pending. Location 20601 Pacific Street, Lot 5, Pacific Reserve. Does anyone wish to have this removed from consent? Seeing none, moving on. Agenda item number 28, case C8-18-105. Applicant Schlick Construction. It's on for approval. Request approval of a special use permit to allow development in the ED North Hills Environmental Resource Overlay District. Location 3327 Lindenwood Lane. Does anyone wish to have this removed from consent? Seeing none, moving on, case 29, C8-18-107, applicant S&W Fence. It is on for approval. Request approval of a large project special use permit in a GI district to allow total building floor area over 40,000 square foot. A portion of the property is located in the flood fringe overlay district. Location 6726 North 87th Circle. Anyone wish to see this removed from consent? Seeing none, moving on, agenda item number 30. Case C7-18-83, applicant Jerry Gordman. It's on for approval. Request approval of a conditional use permit to allow indoor sports and recreation in a CC district. Location 2502 South 133rd Plaza. Anyone wish to see this removed? Seeing none. Agenda item number 32, case C7-18-115, applicant Pell State Trampolines LLC. It is on for approval. Request approval of a conditional use permit to allow indoor sports and recreation in a CC district. Location 5645 North 90th Street. Does anyone wish to have this removed from consent agenda? Seeing none. Final case, agenda item number 33, case C7-18-116, applicant Heartland Church Network. It's on for approval. Request approval of a major amendment to a conditional use permit assumed to allow religious assembly in a R5 district pending. Location 5046 Terrace Drive. Does anyone wish to have this case removed? All right, that takes care of the consent items. We'll go for a motion for those on consent for approval.
I'll make a motion for approval of case numbers 13, 14, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 32, and 33.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you please record the vote?
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Pate?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Carnes?
Yes.
Maggot?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Approved 7-0.
Okay, we'll take a motion for those cases on for layover.
Motion to lay over cases number 2, 3, 5, 12, and 25. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you please record the vote?
Maggot?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Pate?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Carnes?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Approved 7-0.
Okay, those cases we just went through on consent, they've been taken care of for the day. If you're here for one of those cases, there's no more further action taken today. You are free to stay and watch, or you're free to leave. Okay, we'll get started with our first case. It's an administrative meeting only. That means no public testimony will be given. It's agenda item number 1, case C10-17-215, C12-17-216, applicant CC Military LLC, request final approval of Copper Creek lots 1 through 92 and outlots A through G, a subdivision outside the city limits with rezoning from AG to DR and R5. Portions of the property are located within the flood fringe overlay district. This was laid over from our April 4th meeting. Location southeast of 168th Street and Military Road. We're here from the city.
Sure. So this is the final plat of Copper Creek, 92 lots and 7 outlots. The preliminary plat was previously recommended for approval by the Planning Board December 6, 2017, and by the same conditions by the City Council at February 27, 2018. It had been laid over a couple times for a few items that need to be addressed. The applicant has adequately addressed those items, which include an acceptable wetlands analysis and mitigation plan, as well as written concurrence from the Papio Missouri River Natural Resource District regarding the proposed development. The Planning Department recommends approval of the final plat, lots 1 through 92, outlots A through G, subject to the conditions of preliminary plat approval relative to Phase 1 and addressing the 3 conditions listed in your recommendation report to be addressed prior to forwarding the request to City Council.
Are there any questions or comments from the board? If not, we'll entertain a motion.
I move for approval of the final plat, lots 1 through 92, outlots A through G, subject to the conditions of preliminary plat approval relative to Phase 1 and addressing the 3 conditions in the department's recommendation of report prior to forwarding the request to City Council.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you please record the vote?
Moore,
Yes.
Pate,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Carn,
Yes.
Maggot,
Yes.
Becker,
Yes.
Mr. Terra.
Yes.
3-7-0.
Okay, we'll move on to agenda item number 4, case C10-18-78, C12-18-79, applicant Scrupa Investment Company, request preliminary plat approval of Pravada, a subdivision outside the city limits with the waiver of section 53-82B, cul-de-sac length, along with rezoning from AG to DR, R4, R6, and MU. This was laid over from our May 2nd meeting. Location southwest of 204th Street and West Center Road. May we hear from the applicant, please?
Good afternoon, Mr. Rosenbaum, members of the Planning Board. Jim Bouger, 10250 Regency Circle, here on behalf of Scrupa Investment Company, the developer of the property. I have with me here today Carlos Scrupa, who's with the developer, and Sam Homan with the developer, late arriver. Jeff Lake with Summit Development, who's the development consultant on the project, and then Kyle Voll from E&A Consulting Group with the engineering firm that's working on the project. Between us, hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions you might have today. This is a mixed-use, multi-purpose subdivision on 192 acres at the intersection of 204th and West Center Road. This is on the southwest corner of that intersection. There are included in the development are 157 residential lots on approximately 64 acres, 17 mixed-use commercial lots on approximately 40 acres, 2 multifamily lots on approximately 30 acres, and 15 outlots on approximately 27 acres. Just to give you some perspective and where the project is, so the yellow illustrates the southwest corner of 204th and West Center Road, and the 192 acres is encompassed within the area in the yellow. Immediately to the north of this property is some undeveloped ground that's owned by the Heine family. And then there's a detention basin, Zerensky Basin number 1, which has been constructed. Then immediately to the south, there's 2 residential subdivisions that are in the process of being built out right now. Grandview Ridge Estates and the Blue Sage subdivision, which are both large single-family, principally purpose subdivisions. There's a core area here where there's the Papio, Missouri Natural Resources District is actually in the process of building a new lake structure. It's what's called Zerensky Basin 2, which is essentially a detention basin for Lake Zerensky. That project is well underway, and the residential developments are really going fast. If you have been out there, and Elkhorn Public Schools is also going to be opening a new school this fall in the Blue Sage subdivision. Across the street on 204th Street, on the east side of 204th, immediately to the east of our project, Woodsonia is developing some ground, which includes some multifamily purpose, some commercial purpose, and I believe that project is in the process of working its way through the entitlement process at the city. On the caddy corner on the north east corner of 204th and West Center Road, the group has actually owned some additional ground under there that's not being developed presently. We have immediately to the west, there's a Merck Ag plant that's already constructed and operating. And we have reached out to all of the neighbors or the people that would have an interest in this. The Pospisil family actually has a little piece of ground located here. We've coordinated with Bill Pospisil, the owner of that property, and actually some of their properties included within our plat. They have their house there, and they're well aware of the project that's ongoing. We have reviewed the recommendations of the planning department. We do have a recommendation for approval, and the conditions for recommendation are generally acceptable to the developer. There's a few fine points that need to be worked out, but I think we're well on our way to reaching final agreement on most of those issues, and a couple of them are traffic study dependent. So with that, if there's any questions, I can give you a little bit of background on maybe what the demographics on the residential portion are if you're interested. But I do have, like I said, Jeff Lake is here with the development company as well, and the engineers are here if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Does the board have questions or comments for the applicant? No? We'll hear from the city.
Okay, as Jim mentioned, 192 acre site. There is a waiver request of section 53-82B for cul-de-sac length for private street F in your plan. The city is agreeable to this waiver request in this instance due to the necessary street layout, connections, alignment for the stub streets, and the grade on the site. Combination of zoning R4, DR, R6, and mixed use. That being said, the planning department is recommending approval of the waiver of section 53-82B cul-de-sac length, approval of the rezoning from AG to DR, R4, R6, and MU, subject to submittal of an acceptable mixed-use district development agreement prior to forwarding the request to City Council. And finally, approval of the preliminary plat subject to the 23 conditions listed in the recommendation report to be addressed with or prior to submittal of a final plat.
Do we have a motion?
I would move approval of the waiver of section 53-82B cul-de-sac length. approval of the rezoning from AG to DR, R4, R6, and MU, subject to the submittal of an acceptable mixed-use district development agreement prior to forwarding the request to City Council, and approval of the preliminary plat subject to the 23 conditions listed in the report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you please record the vote?
Pate,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Carn,
Yes.
Daggett,
Yes.
Rosacker,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
7-0.
Thank you.
Pass those down for the next case. Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item number 6, case C8-91-91. Applicant The Approach at Shadow Ridge LLC. Request approval of a major amendment to a special use permit to allow outdoor sports and recreation in a DR district. This was laid over from our March 7th meeting. Location between Pacific Street and West Center Road from 180th Street to 192nd Street. Larry, may we hear from the applicant?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Larry Jobin, 11440 West Center Road, appearing on behalf of the applicant, The Approach at SR LLC. With me today from that particular entity is, well, Justin Shanahan with Shadow Ridge Country Club, and also Jason Lanahaw with Lanahaw Development, the co-developer on this particular project. John Coolidge is also here with Lamberniers and the consulting engineers on this project as well. The name of the project is The Escape at Shadow Ridge. As you indicated, it's located on the southeast of Pacific Street on 188th Street. And what we're talking about really today is the major amendment to the special use permit that currently exists that's in place with respect to the golf course and the zoning to allow outdoor recreation, a golf course in DR. So we talked about this had a very extensive public hearing in March 7th, where I think we vetted out all the zoning and plating issues. And so really what's before you is the major amendment to the existing special use permit to carve out these 8.67 acres to allow for this particular development. Since the time that we were here on March 7th, you should know that the City Council did unanimously approve the preliminary plat on May 22nd. So the preliminary plat has been approved by City Council, and so this major amendment then will allow this to go forward to City Council with respect to the full rezoning and this amendment. So the main purpose of the major amendment to the special use permit was really to meet and discuss with the planning department to make sure that the parking requirements of the country club were being satisfied with the changes by carving out this 8.76 acres. So what we determined that the parking requirements have in fact been met. What's required, the country club assembly requires 65 spaces. The 18-hole golf course requires 100 parking spaces. The swimming pool requires 54 parking spaces, and the 3 tennis courts require 6 parking spaces. So the total parking spaces required is 225. The total parking spaces provided are 226. So with that, I think that was the purpose of the layover last time. Again, there was extensive discussion regarding the rezoning and the replatting. The replatting's since been approved by the City Council with respect to the preliminary plat. We appreciate the recommendation from the planning department, find the same acceptable, and we're here to answer any questions and respond to any opposition that may be here.
Larry, just a couple things.
Sure.
Reading in our report, when it comes to the parking spaces, it says, based on staff calculations, the actual number of parking stalls shown on the site plan is 222. So have you had a conversation with the planning department
Yeah,
on that?
that drawing has
And
been
that's
revised.
been
Yes,
revised.
I think, and I actually
Okay.
I caught that before the last one, that they had to draw in 3 more parking spaces, which they were able to accommodate, but I did catch that, and they were able to add those 3 spaces,
Okay,
or 4 spaces, I'm sorry.
good.
Yeah.
One more question. We were just handed a letter from a resident, I believe, at Shadow Ridge. Number 2, it says, and I want you to address this, the attorney representing Shadow Ridge stated in a previous hearing before the planning board that the entrance to Shadow Ridge would not be closed. If you look at the drawing submitted by Shadow Ridge, included with the notice announcing this hearing, you can clearly see that the main entrance to Shadow Ridge is completely blocked by the proposed development. Would you address that, please?
Yeah, I mean, that's simply not true. I have drawings here. Obviously, the Pacific Street entrance is the main entrance into the country club. Shadow Ridge Country Club is not going to shut down the main entrance into their country club. The access is virtually the same today as it will be after this particular development. There's an access point off of Pacific Street at 188th Street that serves the country club and will serve this 28-lot subdivision. And you can also go through the parking lot as you do today, and you can connect to 189th Street. So, I mean, I've got drawings here, I've got aerial photographs. There's
I was just concerned, you addressed this a
Yeah.
couple months ago. I was just concerned to make sure that nothing had been
I'm not really
revised
sure
or
how
changed
that
and that
rumor
you
even
could,
got out there, but
address
that's
that.
never been the case.
okay.
So,
Was that 189th Street there?
over here.
Yeah.
So this access is virtually the same
Okay.
today as it will be tomorrow.
And there's not going to be limited flow of traffic during the construction process either in that? Okay.
I think the only confusion appears to be from the current pathway for the main entrance goes directly by the clubhouse, where with this revision, then it actually ends up going through the parking lot. I think
Well,
that-
no,
that
it's
might
still,
be the
no,
confusion.
but it still goes through the parking lot today.
Yes.
What goes directly from the 188th Street Plaza, I should say 188th Plaza, which is a private drive, it goes straight under the canopy to the country club, so that will be changed. So now it'll curve up and then come back through the parking lot. But as far as the through access, it still goes through the parking lot today, just as it will tomorrow. It's simply reconfigured a little bit.
Hey Larry, in our drawings, it kind of does a roundabout, a little bit of a round thing. Can you show me where it will go into the parking lot, just so I
Sure.
can make this lady feel that we've addressed her
All right,
concerns?
so here's Pacific,
Uh-huh.
right? So here's 188th Plaza. You come in this location, you come around here. Instead of this is no longer there
Okay.
because it used to go underneath the canopy. You can see the canopy right there.
Mhm.
Now you make the bend and wind into the parking lot here, and you come around and by the tennis courts, swimming pool, and you have that same, like I said, let me get this correct with the world here. So what you see there coming through from Pacific to 189th, you also see here. Nothing is different.
And you won't have to change any truck traffic or anything
No.
for deliveries, it'll still go through that?
It'll still function exactly the same.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other proponents that wish to speak? Are there any opponents that wish? Come on forward. Make sure you give your name and address. Thank you, sir.
My name is Robert Leonard Campbell, and my personal residence is 1801 South 186th Street in the Ridges community. Thank you for your time today. Let me start off by saying that speaking in front of the City of Omaha Planning Board is the last thing that I want to do with my day. Don't, okay. But the fact that this proposed development can progress to the stages of potential final approval of the City of Omaha Planning Board is shocking to both my neighbors and me. So I'm here to voice today the concerns of the homeowners of the Ridges community of West Omaha, as well as other communities in Omaha. The principle of this proposal is not isolated to the Ridges, but rather to all communities in Omaha. To put in context, the Ridges is a community of 750 plus homes with an estimated market value of in excess of $300 million and generating tax revenues for the City of Omaha in excess of $7 million. And those numbers could be very conservative. So if the City Planning Board of Omaha votes to pass Replat 17 proposal, you'll be sending, and I'll categorize 3 important messages to the taxpayers and homeowners in the Omaha area. Message number 1 will be, regardless of the time and effort put into planning a master community in Omaha, the Ridges being a prime example, there will always exist the possibility that property land in the community may be rezoned or be repurposed. In layman terms, there is no such thing as putting your pencil down when it comes to rezoning in Omaha. I feel compelled to review again the facts that I addressed to all of you individuals at the planning board meeting 3 months ago. So chronologically, at that time I shared the plot layout of the Ridges community, fantastically planned community. The developers of the golf course, who were also the applicants of this proposed replat, had a clean slate to design and build an 18-hole golf course. After the design of the course was completed, the lots were plotted and the homes in the Ridges were constructed. The marketing material published by the development group, who are also the applicants of this proposed replat, specifically states that, and I quote, "Your whole family will enjoy the completeness of the community." Homes were and are being sold at premium prices based on the rightful assumption that the integrity of the original design of the community will be maintained. Okay, so fast forward 25 years later, all of a sudden an epiphany has occurred, and I quote the applicant's representative as saying, replat 17, the Ridge, is essentially surplus property. That was said in our previous meeting. Interesting, though, to me, is that there is no formal public document, including the original special use permit, that references surplus land or future home development. Certainly, Ridges homeowners do not view any land on the golf course as surplus. The open golf course space is part of the scenic views that they paid the premium to live there and enjoy. So the logical conclusion one makes, and the message that you send, is a master plan community is never a master plan community in the city of Omaha. The goalposts are moving. As long as a developer ticks the necessary boxes needed to fulfill the planning board's requirements, then any land deemed surplus by a developer, very subjectively, or landowner qualifies to be rezoned as he or she sees fit. I have to emphasize, this is not a cornfield that we're talking about that's on 144th and Dodge or 192nd and Dodge. This is a community golf course and homes that have been in existence for 25 years and have generated $7 million of tax revenue for the city of Omaha. So taxpayers and homeowners in Omaha should be very concerned. Concerned because where they buy their home and the surrounding area is within the total realm of possibility to be rezoned. So it's almost like you have to have a mentality of buyer beware, because things will change. Message number 2 that you're sending is the planning board and the city of Omaha ignores the property rights of homeowners in their decision-making process, and covenants governing communities are meaningless. At the planning board meeting on March 8th, 2018, the applicant's representative stated in this meeting, and I quote, "The golf club and country club has never been part of the Ridges covenants." At the recent city council meeting held on May 22nd, 2018, the issue of the Ridges Homeowners Association covenants was addressed to the city council members. A pertinent excerpt of the covenants was read aloud to the council. And city council personnel took note of this, and members asked the representative's applicant, why does this not apply to the RHOA covenants or the Ridges Homeowners covenants? And why aren't they irrelevant in what you're presenting? During the applicant representative's rebuttal, he stated to the city council, and I quote, "I have not read that particular covenant, and I have not seen what Mrs. Campbell has brought forward." So I would ask the question, how can someone make a statement that to you on March 8th that the covenants do not apply when that same person hasn't read them? The excerpt that I previously referred to is not buried in the last page of the 48-page covenants. In fact, it's on the very first page. Furthermore, the Ridges Homeowners Covenants are posted on the Ridges Homeowners Association website. The same website has a link to the Shadow Ridge Country Club website. When we purchased our home in the Ridges, the title company provided a copy of the covenants as part of the closing process. So for the record, I have a copy of the covenants, and I'm not sure if I'm permitted to allow them to be added. So the interesting thing is gone through and highlighted in orange the particular words, and in fact, there are 51 plus references to Shadow Ridge Golf Course and or the golf course. So this is an appropriate segue. So obviously my point is that to go back and say that there's no correlation between the golf course and the homeowners association and the homeowners there is suspect at best. But the segue is, in the third message that I want to convey, is that the relevant, compelling, and important external factors are ignored in the planning board's decision-making process. So, what do I mean by that? A legal case was brought before a state Supreme Court a few years ago, and the interesting part of that case was that it involved an owner of a golf course who desired to rezone the golf course. Okay? It is even more interesting that case was tried in the state of Nebraska by the Supreme Court of Nebraska. Even more interesting is that the property in question is less than 4 miles away from Shadow Ridge Country Club. For the record, I'm submitting a copy of the court ruling of Skyline Woods Homeowners Association case. The ruling found in favor of the homeowners of this community and denied the rezoning of the golf course property. So the three messages that I've outlined are very negative to a taxpayer in Omaha. Lastly, I need to reinforce to the planning board that this is not an issue of change. That was alluded to in our last meeting, and it's not an issue of change. Taxpayers have an expectation of the city planning board that the city planning board will uphold their rights and honor planning decisions and precedents. Frankly, the name of this development has changed a couple times. I think it's called the Approach and the Escapes. And my concern, it's going to be called the Disasters of Shadow Ridge if something isn't done. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other opponents that wish to speak? All right, I'm going to close the public hearing. I'm going to give Larry a chance to come up and talk to some of the points that Robert made, if you wish to do so.
I do, Mr. Chair.
I
members of
took
the
that
board.
from you coming up.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, Larry Jobin, 11440 West Center Road, appearing on behalf of the applicant. Yeah, I mean, these are $1 million plus villas that we're talking about. So there's 28 of them. We're talking about tax base here, and we're talking about what the city of Omaha is supposed to be doing. Well, this is $28 million of additional tax base. So I'm not sure how that's a negative towards the taxpayers of the city of Omaha. As far as the property rights, sure, the single-family residential homeowners have property rights, and so do the Shanahans. And you look at the future land use map. The future land use map defaults to low-density residential housing. That's exactly what this is. It's consistent with the future land use map. As far as the golf course, we went through this extensively at the last public hearing. No portion of the golf course is being touched. Not one hole is being touched. There are over 800 homes, I believe, in the Shadow Ridge area. If you can turn the... bottom left and back there. So this is the Shadow Ridge area in its entirety. And of course, as you can see, it's a square mile. Is there a way to get that brighter? And can you see it clearly enough? Seems like it's dark on the screen. Anyway, you've got Pacific Street to the north, 180th to the east, West Center Road to the south, and of course 192nd Street to the west. So there's a square mile, over 800 homes in this particular single-family subdivision. We went through this the last time at the rezoning and preliminary plat stage. This is Pacific Street here. I don't know if it's easier to see it this way to the south if you want to make it easier to get it with the world here. So this is 188th Plaza that comes in to the Shadow Ridge Country Club. This is an existing practice facility, hole number 1, again, not being touched, no portion of the golf course being touched. This is 8.76 acres that are currently being unused. It has its own access point off of Pacific Street into the particular development. And if you remember, we looked at a view from west looking east, and you have effectively 3 houses that are over 300 and some feet away from the proposed development that will have visibility to this particular development. And of the 28 homes, they only can see 7 of them. The other 21 homes, you have to actually be on the Shadow Ridge Country Club property to see the other 21 homes. So you have, maybe that's it. So you have 7 homes along the east side of 188th Plaza, and the rest of them are all west of 188th Plaza. So you have 3 homes here that have visibility, and you can kind of test that out by looking then east to west, and the same 3 homes that identified looking west to east are the same 3 homes that you see that can see the proposed development looking east to west. So out of 800 some homes, there's 3 homes that have visibility, and not one of those people are here today objecting to this particular proposal. So then we get to the covenant issue, and what I said, I think I was also called a liar at the council meeting, but in any event, what I said is I didn't particularly understand that portion of the covenant that she read in the record. Why? Because she didn't read the whole story. She read one sentence and took it out of context and didn't add the rest. So I have those covenants right here, and I'll make them part of the record as well. It says lots 268, 270, 271, and 272 comprise that property herein, referenced as the golf course or Shadow Ridge Golf Course. I think this is the part she read. These lots comprising the golf course are included within and bound in all respects by the covenants set forth relative to the Design Review Board, inclusive of the requirement of Design Review Board approval of all improvements, structural and landscaping. Okay, then what she didn't read is, nonetheless, these lots 268, 270, 271, 272 are expressly exempted from all provisions herein relative to homeowners association assessments, dues, financial obligations, membership, and voting entitlements. So it said with respect to design review, you have to take it to the Design Review Board to get their review and approval. But otherwise, they're exempted in all respects from these covenants, because these covenants govern the single-family residential homes. Here is, and I'll make this part of the record, here's the letter from the Design Review Board that approved this development. So the Design Review Board did review and did approve this. Mr. Shanahan, Justin, is actually on the Design Review Board, and he abstained from that vote, and it was a unanimous vote by all the other members on the Design Review Board. So I'll make the covenants read in their entirety as far as how they apply, as well as the Design Review Board review and approval of what's being proposed here.
How many members, Larry, are on the Design and Review Board?
Oh, 7.
Seven?
There was 5, but Mr. Shanahan just said 7.
And they are residents of Shadow Ridge?
I believe that they are, all of them, yes.
Okay, all right.
And so, no, 28 homes.
28 homes, okay. Will they be in the homeowners association then, or will
No,
they be
remember,
separate?
we talked about this pretty extensively at the March 7th meeting, and what we said is that the covenants that are going to govern these 28 homes are going to be significantly higher standards than the rest of the development.
So
And
they're
they're-
their own homeowners?
They're on their own homeowners, but also note that they access Pacific Street directly, and they don't really access any part of the Shadow Ridge.
Is it mandatory that they join the golf course?
It is, it will be, yes. And they'll have their own set of dues. It's really designed, if you recall, for people who want to, or probably empty nesters, may have homes, summer or winter homes in nicer places that can have all of their snow removal, landscaping, everything taken care of. And then when they come back, of course, they can be mandatory members of the country club. It's really designed to be a golf course community that's associated with the country club and the golf course.
Did you
So
have
with that, I'm here to answer any questions. But
Okay.
I think this is the second time that we've had this kind of debate. We had it a couple weeks ago at City Council, and of course, they unanimously approved the preliminary plat there as well.
Okay, thank you, Larry.
Thank you.
The public hearing's been closed unless somebody wants to call you up.
Mr. Campbell, come on up. Can you tell me that how he addressed those homeowners, the covenants, is that what? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. Introduce yourself, I'm sorry.
Okay, Robert L. Campbell, 1801 South 186th Street,
Thank you.
Omaha.
Was what he addressed on the covenants what you were talking about, or that they shouldn't apply somehow? Can you explain what
Well-
you were talking about for me?
Couple things. First of all, the reason for giving you these covenants is that, again, to counter Mr. Jobin, he's taken this out of context. If you read the, and take the time to read it, it says provisions herein relative to homeowners association assessments, okay, dues, financial obligations, memberships, and voting entitlements. That has nothing to do with what he just said. Okay, so in other words, the homeowners association doesn't assess the golf course for the fees that they collect. Okay, and they don't assess them for memberships and voting entitlements. So again, I believe that it's taken out of context. The second thing is that what I alluded to earlier when we talked to the city council, in closing of that meeting, okay, in closing of the meeting, the chair said, well, and the words are almost 100% accurate, we said, if these covenants rear their ugly head, I might change my vote. So, and I'd also say that if the applicants are so confident that the covenants don't apply, I would have expected an independent legal opinion to be presented. And there hasn't been one. Okay? And a common person, I'm not a lawyer, but a common person, we have a case in our backyard 4 miles away that fundamentally has the same issues. Okay? And the case was ruled in favor of the homeowners of that subdivision.
I don't know if you can say that case was fundamentally the same. They closed down the Skyline Golf Course
Right? Sure.
and wanted to develop it into something else. Shadow Ridge Golf Course is staying.
Right. But it's no different from carving out a piece of land and rezoning it. That was originally the golf course.
Well,
It's no different.
okay. This isn't a piece of ground that was part of the golf course. Of nothing
Playing course.
with the golf course is being affected by these 28 homes.
I think
18
there's a
homes.
misunderstanding of some of the terminology here that, number one, this isn't a rezoning that we're talking about. that's not what we're doing. The case that you're citing was a rezoning, so it's a totally different case. It happens to be a golf course, but that's about as similar as it is. The other thing is covenant enforcement is not a part of the duty of this body. That is a separate item that you would take up as, as an association. Our planning department has nothing to do with that, okay? Second, I guess that you implied at the outset that once a plan or a piece of property is zoned, that it should be static. And that's just not the reality. The code, every code that exists has a process for things change, because everything changes over time. And that's a lot of what we do, is that very thing. When we don't have part of our zoning jurisdiction being actively developed, it's zoned one thing. Then when somebody decides that the city's moving out that direction, now they want to plat something, that's what we do here. We rezone. And everything falls within the guidelines and the rules of our zoning code. And so the applicants approached with something that was proper within those guidelines, and that's what we're here today to judge on that. But again, just to restate, the covenant enforcement is not something that we have any part in. That's a separate legal matter that you have to deal with elsewhere.
Okay. So could you explain to me then, so you have a golf course property, okay, and now you're taking a piece of close to 9 acres, and now you're calling it residential. So you don't consider that rezoning?
It's not rezoning. You don't
Is that-
understand.
Eric will
I mean,
address
a
that.
layman would think that that's rezoning, because you're going from a special use permit to residential lots.
I intended on Eric, the city addressing your point about rezoning and master plan changing when we get done with the opponents and proponents. So that Eric will address that.
Okay.
Okay.
And frankly, it's disappointing that though it's not your mandate to even hear the word covenant, okay? The covenant is a right of a property owner. And we're talking, this is what the essential thing is. We're talking about property here and changes in property. So the fact, and like I said, it's disappointing the fact that it has to go to a legal forum to be decided when you have, like I said, external factors out there already in your back door that would suggest that this is a violation. So again, I would say though that if this was a clear-cut case by the applicant and they thought that the covenants didn't apply, then they could have had a separate legal opinion and presented to you, and then there wouldn't be any debate, I guess. But that's not the case. So,
Mr. Chair, I think the order of business here is really to approve the major amendment for special use permit. We're not talking about rezoning. We've already had that debate in the past, I think, and I'm
Yes.
looking at this as completely separate action item than what we're talking about here today.
We're going to let Eric with the city address that, Mike, as
Thank
it
you.
goes along. Okay, thank you,
Okay.
Robert.
okay, and
Okay, are there any further questions or comments from the board? Okay, Eric, may we hear from the city, and would you address some of Robert's concerns about rezoning and master plan changing?
Yeah, sure. There's a couple different components with this case. On the agenda today is just approval of the major amendment to the special use permit to allow the outdoor sports and recreation in the DR district. This was on in the May meeting. There was a separate agenda item for the preliminary plat and rezoning approval. That case was approved and proceeded to city council for just the preliminary plat. The rezoning would accompany a final plat when that goes to city council. The same with the major amendment to the special use permit would accompany the final plat and the rezoning when the final plat goes to city council. So yes, they are linked together, they are tied together. However, the request today, because this item was laid over at the March meeting, is specifically to take this area out of the special use permit boundary and to ensure that the appropriate regulations, parking requirements, things of that nature are being followed with our codes and regulations. So there will be another public hearing at city council in the future with the final plat, the rezoning, and this major amendment to the special use permit. So although they're linked together, they are separate paths at certain times, especially when you have a preliminary plat separate from a final plat, but they ultimately end up meeting together at the end at the last city council public hearing. So hopefully that helps clarify. Board member Rosacker did mention a couple items that I was going to talk about covenant enforcement, and the city is not a party to private covenants. It is not the board's responsibility to make judgment on, we're obviously hearing different opinions on different covenants. We do not have those materials. That is not in our review for the request before you today. So specifically to the major amendment, Larry touched on it when he first came up about the parking requirements. Staff has determined that the special use permit requires a minimum parking count of 225 stalls. Just to break that down really quick, 65 parking stalls based on the 258 person occupancy of the clubhouse, 100 stalls for the 18-hole golf course, 6 stalls for the 3 tennis courts, and 54 stalls for the swimming pool area. The site plan provided to us, although it listed 226 parking stalls, when we actually did our review and measured it out and calculated it, we noticed 222 parking stalls. We are comfortable recommending approval, provided that an updated site plan providing at least 225 stalls is provided to us before this can go to city council. Also, it cannot go to city council until the final plat has come back before the board, and any applicable subdivision agreements, platting issues are taken care of before that goes to city council. So it would be some time still before this major amendment to the special use permit can go to city council, because the final plat has not been submitted yet to the planning board for our review. That being said, the planning department is recommending approval of the major amendment to the special use permit to allow outdoor sport and recreation in the DR district, subject to the 6 conditions listed in the recommendation report.
Do we have a motion?
I move approval of the major amendment to the special use permit to allow outdoor sport and recreation in the DR district, subject to the 6 conditions outlined in the report.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you please record the vote?
Morris?
Yes.
Carnes? Yes. Megan?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Pate?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Approved 7-0.
Okay, we're going to move on to agenda item number 7. Case C3-18-56, applicant Planning Department on behalf of the City of Omaha. Request approval of the Charlie Graham TIF redevelopment project plan. Location 4103 Leavenworth Street. Bridget, may we hear from the city, please?
Good afternoon, Bridget Hadley, City Planning, and this does look a little dark here, but as long as you can see it. So again, this is the Charlie Graham TIF redevelopment project plan. Just to give you some bearing, what you see highlighted or shaded in blue is the proposed site, Leavenworth Street and then 42nd Street. The existing site, or the previous site of the Charlie Graham Auto Repair Center was at this corner of the intersection. That site is now demolished, and the idea of this particular project is to relocate that business over to this inner corner of the intersection. This is a long-standing business in our community, been around for at least 30 years, providing light truck repair service and auto body repair service. Locally owned, locally operated. They do have 4 other locations in the metro area. The relocation will propose a 1-story, and just to show you the actual project site, I think I misspoke a little bit at the pre-planning meeting. All of the parking is not to the rear. Some of the parking is to the rear, allowing the building to be brought up to the build-to line, and with the remainder parking to the east of the building. There is a 30-foot buffer between the proposed site and the residential, and some streetscaping. So this would be a 1-story, 17,000 square foot masonry with some glass front structure. And here are a couple of renderings of the elevation. So this is from 42nd Street, and then a view from Leavenworth Street. They are keeping the Charlie Graham sign. I think a lot of people have asked about that, so they are keeping that. They will have this, again, will have 38 parking stalls. If I go back to this rendering, 15 parking spaces and the refuse area in a screened area and gated area, 9 stalls at the southeast of the property over here, and then 14 parking spaces for visitors and clients. So essentially a relocation, keeping a major long-standing business in the community, allowing for a brand new site, new investment, eventually a greater tax base for the community. The owner of the project and the legal representative of the developer is also here. If you should have further questions with that, I'd ask for your approval.
Thank you. Are there any other proponents that wish to speak?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Brent Beller, 1144 West Center Road. I'm appearing on behalf of the project applicant, BH and JH Leavenworth LLC. With me today is Bruce Hanson, the BH. His wife, Bruce, and Joyce own the company, Great Plains Auto Body. The only thing, Bridget, as always, did a fantastic job. The current Charlie Graham building has not been demolished. It's still there. But we're obviously in the process and here to answer any questions, and appreciate support and consideration.
Okay, thank you. Any other proponents? Are there any opponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Board, any questions or comments?
I think it's a great project. I think that they're making room for more expansion of the Nebraska Medicine campus. However, we're taking one property off the tax rolls, and they're going to redevelop it across the street. So it's not the best gain we can have, but at the same time, it's for the tax base, but it's a worthy cause. It'll be interesting to see.
Okay. Any other comments? We've heard from the city. Do you want to add any more, Eric?
Just that the city recommends approval.
Okay. Do we have a motion?
I move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you please record the vote?
Barnes?
Yes.
Rickett?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Page?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
7 members.
Okay. Thank you. Bridget, don't go too far. Agenda item number 8, case C3-18-85, applicant Planning Department on behalf of the City of Omaha. Request approval of the bank Phase 2 TIF redevelopment project plan. Location 1919 Douglas Street. May we hear from the city?
Bridget Hadley, City Planning. The Bank Phase 2 project. Todd Heestad, the owner of the project, New Style, the developer as well, is here to give you a bearing of the location. Highlighted in blue is the actual site. So this is the actual Wells Fargo Bank site. This is 20th Street. This is Farnham, Douglas. The actual TIF project only involves the bank site. It will propose to partially convert a good portion of the bank, leaving about 5,000, close to 5,000 square feet, of which the bank will continue to have an office. It will become a bank branch instead of the actual headquarters for Wells Fargo. The project also involves a mezzanine space, and I didn't really touch on this, a mezzanine space that will be extended to allow for 5 floors of residential. But also part of the project, and I may allow Todd to get into the details, it will extend the, if I could say, the curtain wall, the extension of the wall from here all the way down to allow for an extension of the building to the north. And that brings this space out for Wells Fargo a little bit. But I'll let Todd touch on that to give the actual details. He's been working with our urban design group on the design of the project. There's going to be some materials that they're looking at to just give a slightly different look. There's an Italian travertine that's already there, but there's some other materials that he's looking at, so you can kind of see from this rendering. This is preliminary what they're looking at for the final design. So again, a mezzanine space aligned for 5 floors of residential space, 213 apartments, market rate, mostly 1 and 2 bedrooms, but there will be some 3-bedroom apartments. The reason this is called the Bank Phase 2 is, as I mentioned earlier, the Bank Phase 1, if you will, is this site here. It's the former Farm Credit building, and back in maybe 2010, 2011, that was converted to market rate apartments. Since it is adjacent to this building here, there will be some shared amenities from a swimming pool, fitness suite, some community rooms. So, and by the fact that this was a bank, the name Bank Phase 2 is kind of appropriate. So it makes for a nice community of apartments. This particular building had slightly larger units. This one will have maybe somewhat smaller units, so it'll be complementary and allow him to have a larger market pool for this particular area. In terms of parking, there are 122 parking stalls inside the building, in the basement. And then this particular lot, which came with the purchase of the building, but again, the TIF is only for this building, this lot will serve to help with the tenants in the building. There are 150 parking stalls there. Also, New Style owns, through other TIF projects, this particular Douglas Street parking structure. So there's a lot of parking options that are available, not only for this project, but for some of the other projects. The entrance to the building for the bank tenants will be on the Douglas Street side. The entrance to the building for the apartment tenants will be on the Farnham Street side, about here. There will be some street improvements, streetscaping, I should say, not street improvements, streetscaping along 20th Street and Farnham Street, street trees, and then an alley improvement, and this is the alley right here. There's, I think, about $158,000 budgeted for the public improvements of this particular project. It's already zoned CBD, so no zoning changes there. The land use, according to this zoning district, is appropriate. It was a bank. It's being converted into a mixed use now with residential and commercial, and it is definitely in compliance with the master plan. And with that, I think I will stop and say we'll ask for your approval.
Thank you, Bridget. Are there any other proponents? Please give your name and address.
Yes, Todd Heaston with New Style Development, 2223 Dodge Street.
Thank you, Todd.
And Bridget did an excellent job explaining all of the project, and I'll be here to answer any questions just to mess with the time. Yeah. Yeah.
We, census.
Yeah.
Hey, my only concern is nobody wants to live in Bank Phase 2. Can you change it to the West Bank?
I might do it.
Hey, Todd, is there anything that you're doing with parking for the Rose? I know that they used to park over there. Is there anything that you can work out with them?
We
if
are,
they
that's
need-
actually, yeah, I've been working with Ken Smith, kind of looking at big picture, and that is one of the neighbors, and actually the Children's Museum is working at doing some parking over there too as well, so.
Okay.
We're kind of looking at big picture, trying to figure out how to make make all this parking that we have downtown work for everybody, kind of shared parking.
Thank you.
Is that parking lot remain, or is there another plan for it?
So hopefully someday, they'll be able to look at a bigger picture and possibly parking garage built on top, which would even allow for more parking for the neighborhood as well.
Todd, is the bank drive-through in that parking lot, is that gonna remain there for now?
It isn't. They cut that from 7 down to 2 over the years, and then now from 2 down to 0. The ATMs are gonna stay there, and with the idea that we'll always keep the ATMs, even with that parking garage system, we'll have it worked out to where they can still keep them over there.
I just have a question on the TIF request, if you can. At 15% of the total project cost, it seems like a little bit on the high end
Okay.
for projects.
This one actually ended up being a little on the low. I mean,
Did
we've
it?
had some higher ones, yeah, and this one's pretty tough to make. We've been keeping the bank, even keeping the bank operating within the building while we're doing the project as well. As far as the TIF goes, good example of the bank phase 1. That's actually, we kept this fairly conservative on this one but when phase 1 is actually being overassessed now from where we agreed to, we wouldn't lower it down. We haven't argued it down, but it's actually gonna be probably paid off more in like about a 12-year period.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So these TIFs are, they're actually coming together, and tonight I've been giving the TIF committee a little bit of a hard time. It's like, we're supposed to be 15 years, yes, so don't beat us up too bad.
What kind of improvements are gonna be done to the parking lot then? And much, if anything?
Nothing at
Probably-
this point until we start figuring out what's the best use for it.
Yeah, okay. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
You're gonna be okay on the deal, though. You'll lose money.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, guaranteed.
Are there any, Bridget, did you want to say something?
Yes, I just thought I'd add to your question about the TIF, the percentage. I just want to say that that percentage is a function of two things: the amount of TIF that the project will support, and then once we look at that, then we look at what are the TIF eligible uses. So whenever we have rehab projects, a lot of the costs of a TIF project are going to be TIF eligible. So that percentage can be high on our TIF, on our rehab projects. So I just wanted to point that out.
Are there any other proponents that wish to speak? Are there any opponents? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional questions or comments from the board? Eric, we've heard from the city. Any additional comment?
Department recommends approval.
Do we have a motion?
Motion for approval. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote, please?
Megan?
Yes.
Brookshacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Pate?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Barnes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, the next agenda items are number 9. We're going to take 9, 18, and 31 all together. Patrick, were you going to recuse yourself?
Yeah, I'll recuse myself.
Okay. Eric, shall I read all, each of those 3? Okay. Agenda item number 9, case C3-18-86, applicant Omaha Shelter for Homeless Trust. Request approval of amendment to the future land use element of the city's master plan. Location northwest of 16th and Nicholas Street. Agenda item number 18 is case C10-18-96, C12-18-97. Applicant again is Omaha Shelter for Homeless Trust. Request preliminary and final plat approval of Sienna Francis House Shelter, a minor plat located inside the city limits with rezoning from DS, GC, and GI to DS, along with approval of an ACI 1 overlay district. Location northwest of 16th and Nicholas Street. And the third agenda item that goes with this is agenda item number 31, case C7-08-229A. Applicant, again, Omaha Shelter for Homeless Trust, request approval of a major amendment to a conditional use permit to allow non-commercial day shelters in a DS district. Location northwest of 16th and Nicholas Street. May we hear from the applicant?
Good afternoon, David Lemke, architect with HDR, 8404 Indian Hills Drive, on behalf of the applicant. Thank you for your time this afternoon, and thank you for grouping all this stuff together. The project, let me see all of that. There we go. Is a new shelter for homeless, and it's located on the same site that the current Sienna Francis House is on. The project is a 43,000 approximately square foot facility that's on one level, and will be a shelter for both men and women. The location, you see on the screen, we have Nicholas Street to the south, 16th to the east, 17th, kind of between the pieces of property, 18th to the west. The original Sienna Francis House is located in this position, the Bayrite Building, which is currently the men's shelter in this position. The location just to the north is the location that we're planning for the new project. And so the main entry to the facility will be off of 17th Street in this location. The facility will have dorms for approximately 350 men and for 100 women. It will have commercial kitchen facilities, dining facilities, and counseling rooms and those sorts of things to assist the guests in the shelter. We have met with the planning department, and we've gone through the process of working through the project with them, and we have their recommendation for your approval, and we appreciate that as well. I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Do you feel like you've addressed 9, 18, and 31, or do you want more time to have a say?
No, I think that, yeah, we can kind of go through. I mean,
Okay.
it's zone various things right now. We're kind of cleaning that up.
I didn't want to cut you off if
Yeah.
you had more to say, and if you
There's
felt
one
like.
more thing I should perhaps mention. We did meet with the neighbors, had a meeting on that last week, open invitation. It was a good meeting. They came and expressed their thoughts and how the current shelter is interacting with the neighborhood, and we had representatives from the shelter as well as ourselves there, and we addressed their concerns, and I think it's going to be a good relationship going forward.
How many people attended that meeting?
There were 11 people from the neighborhood, I believe.
Okay.
There will be some demolition.
There will be demolition of, there's currently a building in this location here, and we're not showing it because it's slated for demolition now, and that's the current building that is used for their day shelter. And so right now, the way that the facility operates is they clean during the daytime hours, and the guests need to leave the shelter area, and many go into that building currently. The new facility will have not only area for the dormitories, and everybody will have a bunk, but it will have facilities for dining and queuing and those sorts of things, where they can actually have accommodations during the daytime hours as well.
Okay, but the day shelter then, the people that use that facility, are they
Right.
going to be displaced? They're going to be able to use different building?
Right, there's going to be a couple of temporary facilities brought on site, and so that will be located, I believe, in this position here, and that should be happening in the not-too-distant future as that day shelter is being prepared to be taken down.
Okay, and I think I heard you say the bar right
Bayrite
building?
Yeah.
Is anything happening with that during the construction, or?
Not during the construction, no, that will remain operational. The longer-range plan is that will, because much of the population that's in that building will be moving into the new shelter, and the long-range plan is for that building to remain.
Okay, thank you.
What's the timetable on completion?
December of 19 is the idea, yeah. So we want to start construction this fall yet.
So which buildings stay, those bottom two? Or,
For now, everything stays. So this is the original
Yeah, that
Sienna House.
stays.
This is the Bayrite building,
stays,
and that
okay.
stays. The building that's being demolished, we
right.
already did not show. Now, the original Sienna House, that has a life that's left in it. It was residential grade construction, wood frame, that sort of thing. It served its purpose very well, but it is nearing the end of its life. And so the idea will be, when that time comes, that building will be taken down as well.
Okay,
Very good.
thank you. Any other proponents that wish to speak? Are there any opponents? Okay, come forward, give your name and address, please.
Beverly Wilburn, 2520 Reed Street, Omaha. I didn't make it to your other meeting, sorry. I have a property that's really close to all of this construction going on, and the letter from the city and Sienna Francis House said within 300 feet. I'm kind of concerned about where exactly all of this was going and how it's gonna affect my tenant when I've got homeless people sleeping on our front porch where we've had to replace locks to make sure that he doesn't come home in the middle of the night and have this happening, and they're sleeping in the front yard. They're trying to make tents underneath the porch. I mean, we've had to call the police several times on, the address is 1511 North 17th Street. And it's the only house on the east side of 17th Street. So my concern is all this construction that's gonna be going on, are we gonna have a bigger problem with people wanting to be in the house or on the property because they're upheaval of not being able to have a place to stay?
Okay.
I mean, I
Is
guess
that-
if I could get some kind of
we'll-
guarantee that, I mean.
We'll bring them back up here.
Okay.
Did you have any other
No,
concerns?
my concern is just making sure that I have a safe place for my tenant.
Could you
With all
point
the
to on the
construction.
plan there where your house is located?
Here's a better,
It's, my house is right, I wanna say it's like right here. I mean, this looks like.
here's an aerial.
That's 16.
It's on 16th Street. I mean, it's on 17th Street, but it's.
Can you put on the,
it's
replace
a
that picture?
circle. What? I know, but I'm not. This is the park right here.
I want you to put this up here. It's this house right here.
Okay, so it's right here.
Right there, all right.
It takes a village.
Yeah. Because this is the circle, this is the part, yeah, it'd be right here, but it's the only house
Okay.
that's on that whole block on the east side.
And
I mean, it's just a concern that, because he's had so many
Valid-
issues
It's a valid
with-
concern.
because of the people that the St. Francis House is helping. I mean, and I understand they need help, but I also need to make sure that my tenant has a safe place of
In
his own.
in the past, Beverly, have you called anybody about this?
Yes, I mean, I've even called the St. Francis House and I left a message with Linda Towney. I've left 3 messages with her, but I've yet to been called back. That's why I'm like, okay, if this is a big project going on, but they're not addressing any of the homeowners' concerns. I mean, and I wish I would have been able to make it to their meeting.
We'll ask the architect whether he can take your number and make sure she calls you back. How about that? You, okay.
Oh, so you're
Perfect.
Linda.
Yes.
See, look, you got better than a call back.
Yeah, but it's like I had to come down here and take a half a day off work to get somebody to.
Well, here, we'll bring her up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are there any other opponents? Seeing none, I'm gonna close the public hearing.
I'm gonna bring up a
That's
proponent.
fine.
I assume you're a proponent.
Sorry, I'm Linda Toomey from the Sienna Francis House, 1702 Nicholas Street, and I didn't want to stand because I'm not an opponent. So we did have a neighborhood meeting last week, and we talked about the issues of the behaviors of the people that the Sienna Francis House serves. So one of the things that we are doing is we have a staff member who we have dedicated to taking phone calls from the neighbors who are concerned. If they have someone who's on their property loitering or causing problems, then we want them to reach out to us, and we are going to send staff over to ask them to move or to move them along. We have also engaged with a security firm. We've had that contract going for a year now, who patrols our campus and the surrounding areas for 20 hours a week. And we have been sending them into the park to interact with the people there who are causing problems, to return stolen property when that becomes made aware of us. So there's several things we're doing, and then we're also, really addressing some of the behaviors on our campus, because if they start on our campus, they are going to fall out into the neighborhood. So we are going to continue to meet with some of the neighborhood associations. We know that the requirement was only for 300 feet, and some of the folks who may be experiencing some additional problems are outside of that 300 feet. So we'll continue to work with the other neighborhood associations around us. But given the time frame of this meeting, we only had the opportunity to have one neighborhood meeting.
You have a wonderful cause. I'm sorry. Your mission is wonderful. Your goals are exemplary. But I can understand the neighbors' concerns, and so with what you just said, I assume that in-house you're talking about your clients, the homeless people that come and use your services. Are you educating them on
Yes.
keeping it within the confines of your facility? Because, they I'm sure they have enough issues without.
Yes. So since January, one of the things that happened operationally on the campus is the shelter closed during the day and folks were told they needed to leave. So some would use that day services that David had pointed out that's going down. We are no longer closing the shelter. We're no longer forcing folks to leave the campus during the day. So we hope that that's helping some of the incidents in the neighborhood. And then we also have started using some message boards. And on the message boards, if you come down today, you'll find some messages like no alcohol and drugs on our property, kind of behave yourself, be watchful of the neighborhood, don't loiter, don't do other things that would get you in trouble with the neighbors. And then when that's happening, some of our neighbors have been calling us and we send staff down to bring them back or to help them move along. And then we continue to kind of have a presence by doing some extra patrols when the neighbors bring that to our attention. So we certainly will start patrolling
you know that
kind of
number?
your neighbor.
No, I don't.
We were not
Does your,
aware of.
does your
we
tenant
were,
know that number?
Yeah, we were not aware of that.
I just gave my tenant your number because he's like, I showed
Yeah.
him the letter, but
What's the general number? Do you know the?
Well,
It's 341-1821.
can you two get together?
Yes.
Right,
Yeah, and I've
okay.
given her my card.
All right, thank you.
I've got a question for you,
Okay.
however.
What do you
So,
serve
so
there?
you've got, how many homeless people do you handle? On
So-
a maximum, maybe maximum minute or on
So
average,
on average, right now, about 350 men a night.
per night?
Yes, that's men.
Okay, men, and you have women too?
And we have women,
And
so we are
children.
averaging about 60 women a night.
Okay. And you indicated that you have a security firm, that you've contracted a security
Yes.
firm for 20 hours a week.
Yes.
Is that correct?
And that's
Have you
new.
ever
That's
just-
been
Have you
for a
ever
year.
talked about expanding those numbers of hours to more than 20 hours a week? Because 20 hours a week in a week that has, hundreds of hours,
So
in
primarily,
a small little community like you've got,
I agree. So primarily, we use the security for non-business hours. We have a lot of staff who are on campus who address kind of these issues as they come up during the normal business operations. So we've been using the security for non-business hours. One of the things that came out of the community meeting, the meeting with the neighbors, are some of the businesses are interested in entering in that contract or expanding the hours. Because some of the incidents that happen in the neighborhood are from the people we provide services to. However, some of them are not. So the businesses recognize that, and we're kind of mindful of that they may want to join the security contract or add on to it. So we're in active discussions with some of those to increase the time.
So, what I heard Beverly say was that part of her concern was whether the construction process would displace any of the current clients from your services in the buildings that you are currently using, which would increase the problems that she's had. Can you answer that question?
I can't answer that question. So we're hoping that it does not increase the problems because it doesn't disrupt our current operations. I'm going to switch back to this slide. So this is the men's shelter right here. It will remain completely functional during the time of new construction. So this is also the building that we were telling people you have to leave during the day and come back. We are no longer doing that. It's open 24/7. So we're hoping that will decrease. The other thing is the design of the new shelter is set back further on the property. So we are hoping that that will minimize some of the disruption to the community. And not making people leave, because we know that there's a couple of paths into the neighborhood or downtown when we were asking folks to leave. The women's shelter is actually located right here. This is a secured area, and it will also not be affected by the new construction project, so it will be completely operational.
Go ahead.
The only thing changing during construction is the day services building.
The day services building. And as David explained, that was right here. It's going to be demolished later on this summer. It had reached the end of its useful life. It has a lot of structural problems and things like that. So we will be bringing in some portable space to make way for that. And we're also opening the shelter all day long.
Linda, when we were down there today, we were kind of doing a site review, and there was a lot of people outside. Do you think it'll be difficult to change their habits of saying, well, it's open for you to stay inside all the time now, and if it will be difficult, do you think that you might have to get some additional help, especially during like the summer and fall months? I mean, winter, I wouldn't want to be outside in Nebraska, but I'm not sure about the patterns of everybody else, so.
I agree. Timing is everything, right?
Mhm.
So the building that's being torn down that sat on this corner had to be closed because of some of the remediation things that needed to be done for demolition. So we're going to bring in 2 portable buildings that will be placed. This is actually green space now. The parking lot is a future space. We expect those to be here mid-month, this month, within 2 weeks. So that will give us about 2,000 square feet of usable space that we lost when this building was closed earlier this month, or during May, it's now June, during May for the remediation to take place. So we are hoping that the folks who are outside now are gonna find that we have more space on our campus, and those temporary buildings will only be there until the new shelter is completed. They're
What is included
really
in
meant
a
to be
temporary
temporary.
building? Is that, will that be staffed? Will that just be a, a shelter where, it's just someplace for them to go, or how does that work?
So this building that was here, that we called the Day Services Building, was only operational during the day. It opened at 7 a.m. and closed at 7 p.m. And it was staffed 100% of the time. So these 2 buildings will open at 7 a.m. and close at 7 p.m. also, and there will be staff in them. So they offer folks access to restrooms, showers, meals, case management. If case managers are on campus, ours or other providers who help with homeless individuals are there. That's kind of where they can find them and meet with them. So they do more than just provide a place to sit.
Thank you.
They're also providing some services.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Thank you. Can we hear from the city? And we'll take these, a motion on 9, then a motion on 18, and one on 31.
Yep, sure
Do you
thing.
want to comment on all 3, or do you want to do?
I think I could do one at a time.
Okay.
Pretty briefly.
Let's just go with 9 then.
So yeah, so number 9, this is an amendment to the future land use element of the city's master plan. This site is a little bit larger than the other 2 case numbers. In addition to the Sienna Francis property, there are also a few lots owned by the City of Omaha, New Visions Homeless Services, and Catholic Charities. There is a combination of civic, downtown mixed use, and industrial currently on the future land use map. This amendment would take it all to civic, which I feel, or the department feels is very appropriate. It will not impact any of the current businesses and their ability to function how they currently operate. So the department is recommending approval of that amendment.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we'll go on to agenda item 18.
So agenda item 18 is a preliminary and final plat approval of Sienna Francis House Shelter, along with the consolidation of the rezoning from DS, GC, and GI to GS, along with approval or expansion of the ACI 1 overlay district. With this platting process, it's cleaning up, replatting portions of platted lots, whole platted lots, vacating some excess adjacent street right-of-way, as well as alley vacation right-of-way, specifically to the Sienna Francis campus. The area is served by existing infrastructure. There's 4 items here for the recommendation. Approval of the proposed rezoning to DS, approval of the expansion of the ACI 1 overlay district, approval of the preliminary plat, approval of the final plat.
I make a motion to approve the proposed rezoning to DS, approval of the expansion of the ACI 1 overlay district, approval of the preliminary plat, and approval of the final plat.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote?
Moore,
Yes.
Pate,
Yes.
Barnes,
Yes.
Maggot,
Yes.
Rosenbaker,
Yes.
Karen.
Yes. We'll move on to agenda item number 31.
So this request is for the major amendment to a conditional use permit to allow non-commercial day shelter in the DS district. I'm not going to go through all the specifics. I believe Linda and David did a very sufficient job in doing that. I do want to point out that This type of use, the zoning code requires an advisory committee to meet whenever there's changes such as this for a major amendment. That committee did meet on May 22nd and to evaluate the project and is recommending approval. There was a few slight modifications that they requested that the applicant has updated their operating statement to incorporate those in, which you were provided a copy of at the pre-meeting. It should also be noted that the applicant will be required to receive approval of a couple of waivers from the Zoning Board of Appeals relative to zoning code regulations dictating hours of operation and minimum separation from other uses. So the department recommends approval of the major amendment subject to the 7 conditions listed in the recommendation report.
I move for approval, subject to the 7 conditions listed on the recommendation report. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote?
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 10. Case C3-18-108, applicant Planning Department on behalf of the City of Omaha. Request approval of the surplus declaration and disposal of city property, location 2401 North 24th Street and 2232 Willis Ave. May we hear from the city, please?
So this is a request that the city has put on the agenda to declare these 2 parcels, basically it's one site, totaling approximately 6,500 square feet as surplus in order to be sold to private ownership. The site is the former location of the Simple Simon Daycare and is currently vacant. The property is currently identified as community development block grant funded site. And with the sale of this property, the proceeds generated from that sale would be able to be returned to the city as CDBG funds that can be reinvested into other programs and sites throughout the city. The department, I guess we'll leave it at that. In case there's any public hearing.
Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any comments or questions from the board? Eric?
Department recommends approval.
Okay.
I move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Agenda item number 11, case C3-18-109, applicant Planning Department on behalf of the City of Omaha. Request approval of the surplus declaration and disposal of city property. Location 2414 Lake Street. May we hear from the city?
So this case is very similar to the previous one. This is just located a little bit further to the northwest of that site at 2414 Lake Street. Approximately 5,200 square feet of land. This is the former location of an art gallery, but is also currently vacant. This site too is part of the community development block grant funded site. The proceeds from any sale generated by that would be returned to the city and can be reinvested into other programs and sites throughout the city.
Okay. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Board, any questions or comments?
Recommend approval.
Okay.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. We're going to move on to agenda item number 15. This was on consent. It was removed. It's case C12-18-91. Applicant Sweetbriar 2 LLC. Request preliminary and final plat approval of American Interstate Plaza replat 2, a minor plat located inside the city limits, location southwest of 160th and Evans Street. May we hear from the applicant?
Good afternoon again. Jim Bouger, 10250 Regency Circle, here on behalf of the applicant Sweetbriar 2 LLC. I have with me Luke Weatherly of Olson Associates, engineer, and Bob Begley of Lockwood Development on behalf of the developer. Just a little background. I'm not used to pulling items off the consent agenda recommended for approval, but anyway, there's one issue that we just need
It's all right, Jim.
to chat about. So this project is located generally at 160th Street and West Maple Road. There's a Hy-Vee anchored shopping center that's right at the corner of 156 and Maple. And then Evans Street is immediately to the west of where the Hy-Vee is located, right, and it goes down into Huntington Park subdivision. The site is immediately to the west of the Allegiant Hospital clinic that was developed a couple of years ago and that we replatted as part of American Interstate Plaza. This lot, the area that we have an issue on, this is, and we usually try and get these issues worked out before we come to planning board, but sometimes when we get the rec reports, it gets a little tight in trying to get everybody's attention. So the issue that we were surprised on was recommendation number 6, and that was that there be a connection or connectivity access into the site, which is that there's a joint access drive that was actually constructed when we did the deal with Legion. We had it originally that this lot was again, when you go through the development agreement process, you kind of put buildings where you hope they might be, and where they end up sometimes isn't always where you think they're going to be. And so we had a Primrose School, which is a kind of a high-end daycare school that came to us and asked to buy the site, but they didn't need the whole site. So we came up with a plan to segregate the site into 2 lots. The Primrose School, which is shown here, and then there's just a small office building that'll probably be something in the order of 5,000 to 7,000 square foot, assuming that we can at some point find somebody that's a user that's probably willing to buy that and develop it. But so anyway, this access drive was constructed with the thought that ultimately there's a huge slope here, and Luke will kind of go over the engineering of it with you and why this drive is pretty impractical with the proposed Primrose site. But originally we had thought we would come into the site and have some additional ground to play with to bring in an access drive there. But with the Primrose design, it's not feasible. And again, I'm going to have Luke kind of talk about what the challenges are for us putting in that access. So, Luke, it's yours.
Good afternoon, Luke Weatherly, Olson Associates, 2111 South 67th Street. I'm actually going to turn this map a little bit and spread it out so you can see the full, kind of the full parcel that we're dealing with here. The Primrose location, or the Allegiant Hospital site, is to the west. There's a 3-to-1 slope that separates this site from the Primrose location, or the daycare site. I think it's about 10 to 15 feet from the top elevation of where the existing site is down to that elevation. In the initial mixed-use development agreement, this parcel was allocated for 1 building. What's in front of you today is to separate that out into 2 parcels. As Jim mentioned, Primrose did not need the whole parcel. So what we're trying to do is get the site to work for Primrose, as well as the future development to the east here, while providing an access off of Evans Street. I believe we were limited on our access points on the final plat, the original final plat, to not access from 160th Street, and all the way down here, I can't remember the name of this street. It's in, what's that?
Pinckney?
Pinckney. To the south there, we can't access from that site either. As you can see, there's significant slope on the south side of the site. I already mentioned on the west side of the site there's slope, and in the initial plan, as I was alluding to, this was meant for 1 building. With that 1 building design, there was a walkout feature where there was underground parking that came into the west side of the building, which took up a lot of that slope, and we were able to kind of mitigate for that and keep this access in to that 1 building arrangement. Now that we split this up, we have 1 access, shared access, on the east side of the site for both of the 2 new developments. somewhat segregated from AIP here, or the other Allegiant site there. What I have shown in highlights is the approximate distance of 30 feet between the existing access and the proposed parking lot. Before I get to the actual grade there, I want to talk about the distance we have as we're coming in and sharing this access between these two sites. It's about 6% slope coming down into the site, which is kind of on the high end for a slope entering a site anyway. So we're kind of maxing out what we can do to get into the site down to an elevation where the finished floor of Primrose would be. The slope across the parking lot, we're trying to make up as much grade as possible while sloping towards the northwest. Gets us down to an elevation of about 1228, which is still about 5 to 6 feet difference from that existing elevation there. So maxing out some of those slopes gives us, if we were to make this connection, about a 16% grade in that location. We would also lose parking stalls and some other things in there. If we were to go to more of a reasonable slope and tie that access into this parking lot, that would push us, like I mentioned, a 6% grade all the way back 130 feet to 1231 and take up this entire north portion of parking. So what we're asking is to remove the condition on making this connection here, and we're making a connection towards the east there. So that's kind of the engineering thought behind it and why we presented it the way we initially did. We did reach out this morning, kind of scrambled the last couple days here trying to get with the planning department and Public Works and talk through some of these issues. Forwarded this in an email earlier today, and would be happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Luke, what would happen if you move the Primrose School daycare to the south a little? Or how far can you move that to the south?
We're pretty hamstrung on just that south property because of the existing slope that's there.
Is
So
the reason being the cost of a retaining wall if you moved it further south?
It's not just the cost of the retaining wall. We would lose a lot of parking over here too if we did that. And what we feel is the drive would be doing double duty for what is already there on Evans Street. So we didn't run the numbers for the cost of the retaining wall at this point.
You lost me on if you moved that south, you would lose parking space on the north.
Right.
You lost me there.
30 feet to the south at least to get a drive and keep those parking stalls in there, which with 3-to-1 slope over here, that's at least a 10-foot wall, which is also probably not meeting the regulation for City of Omaha wall heights. So we were kind of between not a rock and a hard place, but a slope and another slope in the street and an existing drive. So.
To build next to the Hy-Vee on that land?
I can't answer that question.
How many parking stalls are required? I don't think they need a site that big either.
What's that?
How many parking stalls are required for the Primrose?
Good question. I don't actually have that number with me now, but what we try to do is keep the parking stalls to the minimum. So I'm assuming what we have here is the number that we need on site, and we can't lose that form. We can provide those calculations.
Is there anything we can vote on today?
I'm looking at all the parking stalls that you've got there on both sites there. Yeah, if you draw that line there, I mean, and just where your pin is there, those parking stalls to my left there, is that part of the Primrose?
These are part of the Primrose. So
That
there's
looks
a
like an
shared
awful lot
drive
of
that comes
parking
down in
for-
the front here, and these are.
Yeah, that looks like an awful lot of parking for a daycare.
Eric, is
Just
there
my
anything we can
lens.
vote on today anyway?
Sure. I'd like to follow my questions if I can here, Trenton. So the parking stalls there that you've got, I mean, I don't know how many employees Primrose will have, but you're not gonna have picking up kids and stuff like that.
Right. I don't have that exact number on me. I think the parking is based off of the number of kids that are in the daycare, and like one stall per every 4 kids. So what the capacity of the kids are in the daycare divided by 4, I don't have that stat right in front of me.
You know,
But
Eric?
No, I'm not familiar with the proposed operating characteristics of the daycare.
But just get back to the question at hand here, you know, if you lose some of those parking stalls, I mean, you still have adequate parking if you would lose some of those parking stalls.
There's a potential, but I think it modifies the site plan significantly from what we currently have.
And Primrose isn't interested in buying the entire site?
I don't believe so, no. To speak on, no.
How do we vote if we don't know how many stalls we're gonna need? I was just kind of talking to Chris. I don't know how we move forward with this today if we don't know how many stalls you need. You don't know how many kids are gonna be using the facility. It makes it difficult to.
I believe they're, go ahead.
Yeah, the only, Jim Boucher, 10250 Regency Circle. So this is a plan that Primrose put together based upon they have actually 3 other school sites within the Omaha metropolitan area. So they come up with their plan, and they have their parking requirements and parking needs that are associated with their facilities. I can't tell you whether that's different than code. I don't know the answer to that. But they are, I said, the genesis of the site plan and the parking plan is with Primrose. So I don't know that there's an ability to really remove parking or limit the number of parking stalls, because that doesn't work with their business plan and business model. I don't have young kids anymore, but I understand the Primrose is a very high-end, very expensive school-type environment, so they have a lot more, I guess, almost like a preschool or kindergarten, and they have a lot more activities for the parents and kids and stuff. So I think they have a lot more traffic and use on off hours than a traditional daycare does. But that's about all I can say about it. Thank you.
Jim, one of my concerns about approving it the way you want it today is that when the CHI property was developed, that was supposed to have a shared and a separate, which it would no longer have. It would have 2 separate entrances, which I think would require a major amendment. Is that right?
Possibly, yes.
Yeah. So, in my mind, we either have to approve what the city has recommended, which doesn't work for you, or lay it over and let you guys work it out. I mean, I hate to do that to you, but I also can't guarantee you that, you know, I don't want to send you down that road and then basically guarantee you that we'd approve a major amendment later, which I don't know that we would, so.
Right, you know, guess I'm
You
not
got
sure.
us between a slope and a slope.
Yeah, we're between a slope and a slope.
You know, and I don't know if you, this is one of the sites you visited today, but
It is.
it is definitely
It
a
is.
challenge from an elevation standpoint, particularly on the south side. I mean, it's dramatic,
Yeah,
the elevation changes.
I mean, I think what makes it challenging is the way you want to use the lot, which is unfortunate, but
Yeah.
it is possible to make it work. It just doesn't work for that, and I don't know if.
What would you like us to do?
Well, I'd like you to approve it without recommendation number 6. You know, I guess I don't want it. I guess we'd rather not have it laid over, but if that's the only alternative, we could talk to the planning department some more. I wish it would have come up more when we had our pre-app meeting, that it was that definite of a requirement. It didn't, and so we were a little surprised when it did show up in the recommendations, to be honest with you. So, I don't know, I guess the layover is probably our best alternative right now,
It would
because
be
without
your best
Primrose's
alternative.
input, we can't really say that we
Yeah.
can change it or
Right.
allow that access.
I understand.
Yeah, I think that's your best alternative, Jim, the way Chris laid it out.
For 30 days?
That'd be, yes, our preference, yes.
Are there any other proponents that wish to speak? Are there any opponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments or questions from the board? Eric?
Yeah, so,
Speak, and if you could address a major amendment if we went, you know,
Sure.
down that road of
Yeah.
where we're at.
So when we originally met with the applicant, to determine the path necessary, advised for the plating, and at the time it appeared that a minor amendment to the mixed-use development agreement rather than a major amendment. Okay, and so that's why there's not a major amendment to the mixed-use plan that we see oftentimes with other cases. I guess when we did our full review, we determined that the connection could be made. That was always intended with the mixed-use plan, and therefore our condition to make the connection. The applicant, they did try to reach out, yesterday and this morning. Obviously, I've been with you folks all day today, so I haven't had a chance to be at my desk and, respond to any emails or phone calls. The concern is the regulations of the mixed-use district in the zoning code allows for one unshared access point and one shared access to a property. Okay, so right now when you're looking at the CHI clinic to the west, they have one unshared access and this shared access. The Primrose, their site, could utilize that shared access point and a new access point. If the condition for the connection is taken away, I don't know as we sit here at this time whether we can process that mixed-use amendment as a minor amendment. That's the concern, and how we get into those access points for the entire development. And so it is quite possible that a major amendment to that mixed-use agreement would be required, which, as I sit here right now and with us doing our review, I don't believe that staff could support that. Now, perhaps if we meet with the applicant and go over some of these numbers, and talk it through, that's probably the best method in what I would advise. So our recommendation is, for approval, but staff would definitely be acceptable to a layover as well.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right. We'll move on to agenda item number 16. This was on consent for approval. Was taken off. It's case C10-18-92, C12-18-93, applicant Yuri Paskar. Request preliminary and final plat approval of Benny Row, a minor plat located inside the city limits with rezoning from R435 to R4. Location northeast of 67th Avenue and Benny Street. Is the applicant present? Oh, thank you.
I'm not sure if he is. He's supposed to
Or
be.
the representative of the applicant. I
Douglas
should
Dreesen, 10836 Old Mill Road, appearing on behalf of the applicant. He indicated he was going to be down here. He's been working primarily with our survey department. Oh, there he is. Okay. And so I haven't had a lot of FaceTime with him, but I get this delegated to me somehow. Anyway, the project is, there's a vacant piece of property on the northeast corner of 67th and Benny. There's an existing house right on the corner, but there's a room for 3 more of those style houses to the east of that. The challenge there has been there's no sanitary sewer provided for, believe it or not, in an area that's been around that long. Mr. Paskar's looked at the property, came in, and was interested in creating more residences there. There is sanitary sewer to the west in 67th Street. It requires mechanical lifting to get the sewage into that main, which is then gravity fed from there. We've worked with the public works staff and planning department to get those issues worked out. The site does fall pretty heavily to the east and to the north. In your recommendation, it also says that we will not discharge more stormwater than currently comes off the site. That may be the concern of some of the neighbors. We'll address that in doing the development. With that, be happy to answer any questions you may have and hear from the other questions. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other proponents? Are there any opponents that wish to speak? Go ahead, come forward and give your name and address, please.
Hi, thank you. My name is Nancy Besh, and my residence is at 6631 Wirt Street. The concern I have with this development is the drop-off at the back of their property. That's at least a 10 to 15-foot drop-off, and if anything does happen, such as a landslide, that would come right into my property. That is my concern. I'm not concerned about, if a development, I'm concerned about that land and coming into my, if it happens.
Okay.
I am the,
Third house?
on Wirt Street.
Yeah.
I am the third house down.
Okay.
So you're on two lots.
A big 2-story. It's a lot and a quarter, or a lot and a half.
Mr. Dreesen? So, do we know where these houses are gonna sit, or whether they're gonna sit towards the front?
Well, your packet shows kind of the building envelopes. We don't have, at least I'm not aware of final building plans yet. I don't know if Mr. Pascar's figured that out, or if he's gonna market those lots as customs.
Wouldn't the city take that into advisement when they get a building permit?
The city's going to take that into account, and the city's going to take in the stormwater that would affect you, Nancy, into account.
Well, in regards to the landslide potential, we can do a geotechnical investigation in that area. The fact that it's totally surrounded by residential property that hasn't had a problem for, I'm going to say, upward of 50 years should give you some comfort in the likelihood of that happening. Isn't very good. However, we are east of 72nd Street, and typically there's a reason why property is vacant. When you see it east of 72nd Street, Mr. Pascar is not interested in dealing with differential settlement problems and those kind of things, so we'll investigate the soils thoroughly before submitting for any building permit.
It's on the record.
Okay. Nancy,
Okay.
did you have any other concerns?
Well, mine was just the excavating, the starting of it, excavating, because that land hasn't been touched for such a long time. My parents owned that house prior to me buying it, and they bought it in the mid-60s. So I've lived there quite a bit of my life, and I know that land has not been touched. I'm concerned that when it starts being touched, then that's when a problem might arise.
Okay.
Has it always been vacant?
Yes, it always has been vacant. When I was a teenager, there was a older couple that lived in the house that is still there, and they lived so they owned all that property.
It sounds like you're covered with everything he said he'll do, and with the city's investigation before they get a building permit.
The city, Nancy, will also require silt fence along that property line to catch any runoff and mud, soil.
That was my main concern, because I really don't want mud in my house.
Okay.
Thanks for coming down.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Are there any other opponents? Seeing none, close the public hearing. Mr. Dreesen, did you have any other comments?
No, I want to give Nancy my card.
Okay, thank you. Any comments or questions from the board? May we hear from the city?
Sure. So Doug touched on the extension of the public sewer to provide adequate coverage for the 4 lots that would be within the site boundaries. Just as Greg mentioned, there would be requirements for temporary silt fence. Any approved building permit accounts for grading in the construction phase. If there are any issues with that, adjacent property owners are definitely encouraged to call into our permits and inspections division so that we can look into it to make sure the proper procedures are taking place. That being said, Department is recommending approval of the rezoning from R435 to R4, approval of the preliminary plat subject to the 4 conditions listed in your report, and approval of the final plat subject to the conditions of the preliminary plat approval and submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement prior to forwarding the final plat to City Council.
Okay, do we have a motion?
Approval of the rezoning from R435 to R4, approval of the preliminary plat subject to the 4 conditions listed in the report. Second.
What we got?
Oh, and approval of the final plat subject to the conditions of the preliminary plat approval and submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement prior to forwarding the final plat to the City Council.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you please record the vote?
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay. We'll move on to agenda item number 17. Case C10-18-94, C12-18-95. Applicant Todd Schneiderwind. Am I saying that right? Nope. Say it for me. Schneiderwind. I'm sorry. Request preliminary and final plat approval of Tower Plaza Replat 14, a minor plat located inside the city limits with rezoning from R7 and GC to GC, along with expansion of the ACI 265 overlay district. Portion of the property is located in an ACI 2 overlay district. Location 8012 West Dodge Road and 8031 Davenport Street. May we hear from the applicant's representative, please?
Douglas Dreesen, 10836 Old Mill Road, appearing on behalf of the applicant, Todd Schneiderwind, who's also in the audience, to answer any questions. This is kind of part of a 3-step process. The Schneiderwinds own the building that's in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. They're having issues with parking. They've acquired the property where it's kind of shaded in with the parking drawn in as an attempt to solve those parking issues. That's an area that you guys, I'm sure, noticed was in transition when you were out there today, that used to be residential and it's generally turning commercial office. There is one single-family residence left in that block, and it just happens to be right to the west of the Schneiderwind property. That gentleman was here today. Apparently he'd learned as much as he wanted to learn today and had to go to another commitment, but we have been communicating with him in regard to how to make this parking lot work given the proximity to his residence. We don't have those details worked out at this point, but he certainly appears to be cooperative at this point. We also have a screening issue to the north. The 2 residences that front the north side of Davenport are both zoned R7. We've provided screening in our site plan, hedgerow screening to prevent car lights from the parking lot and on shining into those windows. That's another block that I anticipate is probably going to go from commercial to office. To the west of there has already done a lot of that. So we're here to combine these into these two lots into one, get consistent zoning, add an ACI overlay to the property. The ACI overlay will require that this site go through urban design review. I had some conversations with Tim Freeze and Jed Moulton, in that regard, so there may be some modifications to that parking lot, adding, say, landscaped islands, those kind of things. The Schneiderwins would like to get upwards of 15 parking stalls there. It's a narrow piece of property. It will require waivers from Zoning Board of Appeals, even if it was 2 lanes with 1 row of parking. That doesn't get us to the number of parking stalls that we'd like to get to. But this is the first step. Hopefully we can get through the other 2 steps and come to a good solution with the neighbors. And with that, we're asking for your recommendation of approval. And we'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other proponents? Any opponents? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any questions, comments from the board? Eric, may we hear from the city?
Sure. So this area is sort of in an area of transition. It's always difficult when you have, obviously, commercial and office uses fronting West Dodge Road, and along Davenport Street, it's primarily residential. However, the future land use map does indicate office and commercial for this entire area. So, it's how do you accommodate those existing residential properties when there is support to rezone some of the properties or expand that commercial zoning. So, trying to accommodate all those different factors is sometimes a challenge and something we work with on a case-to-case basis. So the existing site fronting West Dodge Road is currently zoned GC. The application is to rezone R7 and GC for the entire site to GC. Typically, planning department is not as supportive of expanding GC zoning due to the reason that there are potential uses in site development regulations that are much broader and less restrictive than CC zoning. So we are recommending that the site be zoned to CC, not GC. So that's why you'll hear a denial when I make my recommendation, but also followed by an approval for the zoning. As Doug mentioned, they're as currently proposed, although the site plan is not specifically reviewed as part of this plating and rezoning request, we obviously look at it to any potential factors, and there would be a number of waivers that would be needed from Zoning Board of Appeals and possibly the Urban Design Review Board, just as Doug had mentioned. So the city's recommendation is denial of the rezoning from R7 and GC to GC, approval of the rezoning from R7 and GC to CC, approval of the expansion of the ACI 2 overlay district, approval of the preliminary plat subject to the 2 conditions listed in your report, and approval of the final plat subject to the conditions of preliminary plat approval, along with submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement if necessary prior to forwarding the plat to the city council for final action.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I move. Oh, go ahead.
Before we do that,
Go
can I
ahead.
ask Mr. Dreesen a question? Is your client, the applicant, accepting of that change to CC versus GC?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you. That's all I need. Thank you.
Okay, I move for denial of the rezoning from R7 and GC to GC, approval of the rezoning from R7 and GC to CC, approval of the expansion of the ACI 265 overlay district, and approval of the preliminary plat subject to the 2 conditions in the department's recommendation report, and finally approval of the final plat subject to the conditions of preliminary plat approval, along with submittal of an acceptable final subdivision agreement if necessary prior to forwarding the plat to the city council for final action.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote, please?
Megan?
Yes.
Rosacker?
Yes.
Moore?
Yes.
Bates?
Yes.
Morris?
Yes.
Barnes? Yes.
Yes.
Thank y'all.
Okay, thank you. Agenda item number 19, case C10-18-100. Applicant Suzanne C. Rittenhouse. This was on for layover. Request rezoning from AG and DR to AG and DR. Property is located within the flood fringe overlay district. Location southeast of 252nd and Blondo Streets. May we hear from the applicant's representative, please?
Afternoon, Jason Thielen, E&A Consulting Group, 10909 Mill Valley Road. Here on behalf of the applicant, Susan Rittenhouse. I wish this was an easy up and down, but I gotta give you some background on this and then we'll kind of get to where we need to get. So, this parcel here is Walton, and this parcel here is Rittenhouse, okay? In 2015, Rittenhouse and Walton had a agreement to sell a portion of his property, Rittenhouse to Walton, and he went before title and money was exchanged and recorded a plat in 2015. Okay? Mr. Rittenhouse had some health issues, was doing this on his own. Mr. Walton had every intention to pay for the property, and as things would have it, payment was not received, and therefore title and property was not conveyed at that time. But the plat had been recorded, zoning had been changed, and so we have a title issue. Mr. Rittenhouse's brother got involved due to some health issues, started working with Mr. Walton to sort of a rent-to-own situation where he was going to lease the land. There's buildings on it. He utilizes those buildings. And through 16 and 17 missed payments, long story short, they're at a point where they need to sell the property to help Mr. Rittenhouse with his health bills. And they can't sell the property because it's not zoned and properly subdivided. However, they still maintain title to it. So it is a mess. Right? I wish I was just caught between two slopes. So it's really not a zoning or a platting issue. It is really a title issue. No conveyance of ownership and title. The property hasn't changed hands. No money has changed hands, and we need to clean that up. And the only way to clean that up really is a zoning change of zone to go back from DR to AG and subdivide that property back from Walton to Rittenhouse. Unfortunately, during those couple years, buildings were built to code. They were all permitted by the city of Omaha. And so we are going to have some issues with some setbacks that we know we'll have to go to the Zoning Board of Appeals for a side yard setback, in particular this building here. So you can kind of see these two buildings were original before the plat was recorded in 2015. That property, this is way out on 252nd and Blondo, only had county right of way. So when that plat was recorded in 2015, we dedicated the extra 17 feet as we typically would, would put these buildings in basically a non-conforming situation and nobody's fault. These buildings were built per code. They meet front yard setbacks, side yard setbacks, but that's because this was platted and new property, basically a new lot was created. So that's a situation we're in. Included in your packet was the settlement agreement that Mr. Walton as well as Mrs. Rittenhouse signed, that basically Mr. Walton removes his rights to the property, agrees to sign a final plat and to move forward to get this property back into Mr. Rittenhouse's. It is still in his possession, but just to clean it up from a title perspective. The reason for the layover really is it's my understanding Mr. Walton has a business out here. We're not entirely sure, planning department's not entirely sure whether that's being run legally or it's fitting the proper zoning. It's my understanding it's ag related. However, I do not know. And so I talked with planning about this yesterday and told them that I'd be pulling it off from the standpoint of if it's a code enforcement issue, then let's enforce the code and make him either conduct that business legally or stop conducting that business. It is my understanding he's removed all of his possessions from the buildings that have been built there. And this really is just a title issue. And so I asked that we continue to move it forward so we can get this just really cleaned up. And if the code enforcement component between now, it's got to go to city council and I've got to go to the ZBA for some reason, can't be cleaned up, there's opportunities to hold us up if there's some way that we can help the city get that situation handled. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Hopefully that all made sense. The legal remedy is the settlement agreement. They've already went down. Correct. And I've got a copy of that. If that's not included, and I can submit that.
We got it.
Perfect. Yeah.
How quickly does the Rittenhouse family need to get this cleaned up and sold.
Well, they've got somebody who wants to buy it, like now. So I basically told them it's gonna take, we gotta go through zoning as well as ZBA. I mean, it's gonna take 4 to 6 months would be my guess. I prepared them for that. The buyers are prepared for that. So a 30-day delay does make a difference in this situation.
Okay. Any other proponents? Any opponents that wish to speak? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. Any additional comments, questions from the board? We'll wait for Eric to. Yeah. Yep. That's all right.
Did you ask for me?
Yes. I said we'll wait for you, so. Eric, may we hear from the city?
Yeah, so, tough situation, obviously. Jason and his team came to us many months ago looking at possibilities of, whether that recorded plat, if there's a way to, vacate that or reverse that change. And we had talked to the law department at that time, and it was determined that that was not a possibility. So, going through the step of the rezoning and the administrative plat and zoning board of appeals, yes, that is the proper channel. Unfortunately, during our review, you start uncovering, we noticed on, Google Maps, there's basically a business name that comes up, and so we visit that website, and there's, a list for the property to purchase mulch, lumber, firewood, topsoil, compost from a warehouse on that site. You start getting into parameters. There's no certificate of occupancy that we have on record for any type of business. So anytime you have these types of outbuildings, you have possible business going on that we're not entirely sure what's happening, we need to look into it. There's been other circumstances in our jurisdiction that there's been businesses run out of these types of ag buildings that don't have the proper sprinkler system. They're having uses there that should not be there, and it's become a large issue going through the court system, and we're just trying to prevent that. I know Jason's client is the one that's trying to get everything fixed up, and perhaps this, the other property is the one that's perhaps in violation. We do have a floodplain development permit for the greenhouse on the eastern portion of the site in 2013. I'm not aware of any other building permits. Now, there are certain ag-related buildings that can be built in ag zoning for ag purposes without building permits. However, I don't know if all of those buildings fit under that classification, and so these are the concerns that we have. We definitely want to work with the applicant in moving forward and trying to figure out as much information as possible. We feel at this time, a layover for us to meet and try to get a grasp on what's going on out there, and perhaps get our code enforcement involved, make sure proper permits have occurred or not occurred. But when I looked into it personally, I was a little alarmed just with the lack of permits.
And that's news to me. I've asked the applicant multiple times if buildings were built with permits, because I said that's going to be an issue, and he assured me that they were. So I will do my due diligence on that side and say, look, this is what the city has found.
And there's also certain buildings that have been there probably prior to our jurisdiction.
They were,
so,
that's correct.
That's.
I have a question, and I guess it's for Jason, and I was taking some other notes, so maybe I missed this in your testimony. But on the aerial in our report, it shows a building that I don't think, maybe you addressed it, but I don't think you did. If you look at the aerial compared to the plat that's as part of our package, that most eastern building on the southeast building.
This
No,
here?
that one right there.
Yes.
It doesn't show, it shows up on the aerial, obviously.
Correct.
But it doesn't show up on the plat that's before us.
So, well,
do we know if, well, I don't think you mentioned. Go ahead. That's my question.
Your question is, has it been, why doesn't it show up on the plat?
Well, you didn't talk about it, and you talked, I think under what you said is the two buildings,
Because
those two were permitted, but nobody talked about that third building.
Yes, I asked the question of the applicant, has all of these buildings, even the ones they didn't build, so that's not on their property, have they all been, to his knowledge, they've all been permitted and they were built? That was his comment. I didn't mention this one simply because it's already on our property. You know, we're trying to take back this little piece of ground, so with these two buildings on it.
Okay.
These two buildings, is my understanding, were there originally prior to the 2015 original split. I think this greenhouse was built sometime after that. These I know were built after that, as well as this one. It's my understanding that Rittenhouse was leasing these to Walton, and that was part of the deal. Well, that's what I know.
Yeah, and I was just wondering.
Yeah.
And board members, I think Eric pointed out our concerns is we're not really sure what's going on out here. Not any fault on
It's a valid concern.
on Jason's part. He's representing an owner, but we've seen, without giving specific addresses, we've seen at least a handful of similar sites like this to where it's zoned ag, zoned DR, kind of out in the sticks, if you will, out in the outer limits of our jurisdiction. And things start happening and things progress too much, and then we run up against code issues, quite frankly, and been down that road before in previous approvals, some not previous approvals, but previous approvals where then we wind up in court, and as you start compiling that information for those processes, it's, well, the city approved this and the city approved that. So I think our apprehension is maybe not to get in that situation again until we fully understand what's going on in these sites.
So if you find out, you do your investigation, find out there are code violations, what do you do then? What's your next steps? What's the city's next steps?
We notice the property owners and tell them to cease what they're doing at that time until they can, okay, so there's two things. There's a couple ways we go. We tell them to stop doing what they are doing, at least come talk to us to see if there's some kind of resolution. A lot of the times, some of the times there's not a resolution to what has been happening on these sites. So it's cease and desist what you're doing on the site, so.
You know, my comment, I completely understand that, but again, we're trying to clean up a title issue, and the code enforcement's there, whether the title is clean or not. So I don't know that I completely understand where staff is at, but that situation exists whether this property is with Mr. Walton. Well, technically, it's not with Mr. Walton, but whether the line, essentially what we're arguing about, right, is a line on a piece of paper and a zoning change here that still has to go forward to city council. And I still have to go to the zoning board of appeals. And so all I'm asking is let's effort that, because my owner wants to effort that and make sure that it's done, that we get this settled. And so they have every intention of helping the city. They don't benefit from his businesses at all. It's my understanding all of his stuff is out of the buildings that they will own. Now, if he's still, that doesn't stop him from continuing his operation on the buildings that will maintain on his property. So we have no control over that. So all I'm asking is to move this line back to where it should be, where a proper title is at, and so I can at least allow my client to move forward. But we've got another 4 or 5 months of approvals ahead of us before we get to that point where this gets done.
Okay. I did close the public hearing, but that's all right.
I'm out of order.
Any additional comments or questions of Jason? Did you want to say any more, Eric?
I don't think I do. I mean, we have a recommendation for layover. I don't know if Dave has anything else either.
Dave, did you have any? Okay. Do we have a motion from the board? We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote, please?
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Pate,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Barnes,
Yes.
Magid,
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Jason. I think that was our last, case. We're going to have a motion on last month's planning board minutes.
I move to approve the tour minutes from May 2nd, 2018.
The tour minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record?
was that Megan, the second person?
Megan abstained.
I'll go in order of two.
That was you, Mr. Rosacker,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Pate,
Abstain.
Morris,
Yes.
Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. Now we'll look at a motion for the pre-meeting.
Now, on
minutes.
the pre-meeting, I noticed there were a couple things missing after Debbie left the meeting, so I will give this to her, but I wanted to read it to you. At the end of the minutes where it says existing home is remodeled, then I would say, new paragraph, Eric England stated case number 11 involved an incorrect calculation of the height at 52 feet and it should be 59 feet. Next, new paragraph, Eric England stated case number 10 will result in a loss of some parking, and they are working to find a compromise. The south side of the site will require a lease of the area in the right-of-way or a vacation of some parking stalls. And final new paragraph, actually, I read that wrong. Number 9 should have been, Eric England stated case number 9 requires a waiver due to the proposed height of the flagpole and that the department recommends a limit of 75 feet as permitted by the zoning code. And then the number 11 case should be last, and the meeting was adjourned at 1:13 p.m. So I would move for approval of the pre-meeting minutes with those changes.
Okay.
And I'll give them to Debbie.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote?
Who seconded? Who seconded?
Dave.
Rosacker,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Pate,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Barnes,
Yes.
Magid,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, and Chris, thank you for catching that and updating those minutes. And then we need say what?
Motion to adjourn? Oh, we got
No,
it.
we need a motion on the planning board minutes from May.
Move to approve the minutes from the May planning board meeting.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote?
Okay. Moore,
Yes.
Pate,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Barnes,
Yes.
Magid,
Yes.
Rosacker,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes. And do we have a motion for adjournment?
That's always a quick motion.
We have a motion and a second. Debbie, will you record the vote, please?
Moore,
Yes.
Pate,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Barnes,
Yes.
Magid, Rosacker,
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Way to get us out on time. Good job, guys. I was a little worried this was gonna be a long one.
It was a long one compared to last month.
Still